Joining me now is Eyewitness News legal analyst and former United States Attorney Robert Corrente, who has extensive experience in federal court cases. The jury deliberated, Robert, for just a little over 11 hours before coming back with guilty on all 30 counts. This wasn't really a surprise, was it?
It was not. Although there were 30 counts the jury had to consider, there was a fair amount of overlap, and I think it seemed to everybody going into the case that it was going to be sort of an all-or-nothing verdict.
Did admitting he took part in the bombings at the beginning make this case easier to decide?
It certainly made the first part of the case that we've just seen easier, because he did not contest the factual underpinnings of what had gone on. But it really plays into the second half of the trial in the penalty phase, and I think what he was doing here was just trying to set up his defense in that phase. All
right, so that's the big question, the penalty phase. Will he receive the death penalty? What does the jury have to agree upon for this to happen? It's
a single question for the jury. Do we impose the death penalty, or do we sentence him to life imprisonment? And remember, in the penalty phase, they're not looking just at the facts of the bombing and the facts of the carjacking and the shooting, but they're looking at all of what are called the aggravating and mitigating factors presented by the prosecution and by the defense about why the death penalty is or is not justified here.
Okay, Eyewitness News legal analyst Robert Corrente. Robert, thank you very much for being here. We're going to have more with the former U.S. attorney coming up on Eyewitness News at 6.
And our in-depth coverage of the Boston Marathon bombings trial continues now. I'm joined by former U.S. Attorney for Rhode Island and Eyewitness News legal analyst Robert Corrente. You've prosecuted federal cases. You have expertise on the court process. So let's look ahead to the penalty phase of this trial. The judge said it could start next week. Why does the court want to get it underway so quickly?
Well, there's really no benefit in delaying the process. You do have a jury that's been impaneled that is now sort of in between the two phases, and you want to minimize the possibility that a juror is going to be exposed to a press account or something that he or she shouldn't be reading. So it really makes sense for the judge to push forward and get this concluded as quickly as possible.
Not to mention all the time the jurors have already spent on the trial. Now, how is the penalty phase different from this first phase of the trial?
Well, the focus is going to be a little bit different, because in this first phase, guilt or innocence, the jury is just looking at the facts giving rise to the charges in trying to determine whether or not the defendant should be found guilty, as he has been on all 30 counts. In the penalty phase, the only question before the jury is whether or not to impose the death penalty, and they get to consider what are called aggravating and mitigating factors as put forth by the prosecution and the defense.
Okay. Now, I was curious. I looked back, because when we have so many of these people on death row, say the jury does come back with the death penalty, so many times we see these death penalty cases or death row last for years. In the case of Timothy McVeigh, I looked up, it was 4 years before he was put to death for the Oklahoma City bombings. Is that something we should expect, that these cases just, or death row lasts for a few years before something happens?
4 years is actually a very short time in these cases. I mean, there are some of these cases where the appeals will go on for 10 or 12 or 15 years because of the magnitude of the penalty. The appellate issues here, and the appellate efforts in these cases, are extraordinary.
So the appeals are really what drags it out?
Yes.
All right, Robert Corrente, thank you so much once again.
And as we've been reporting, the trial is now only halfway complete. You can count on Eyewitness News for continuing coverage of the Marathon bombings case as it moves on to the penalty phase. We'll have the latest developments right here on WPRI 12 and on our website, WPRI.com.